All right. Well, welcome everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. My name's Corey Sweet, and I'm the PSE coordinator for SnapEd TenSep. And I'm really excited for this Monday meetup. Today, we are going to be talking about leveraging funds and resources, specifically for PSE projects. So as always, our Monday meetup sessions are funded through TenSep SnapEd program, and PSE initiatives discussed during these sessions are intended for a TenSep limited resource audience and meant to be provided at TenSep SnapEd qualifying sites. This is our funding indicia. All right, so we are well into our way for these Monday meetups. We have our next Monday meetup coming up July 12th, and that's the P and PSC. And we are talking about policy there. We have some really good speakers lined up, and we're going to be talking about Extension's role in policy and some great ideas for making changes. So that'll be a really great one to join us for. On August 9th, we'll have our last wrap up Monday meetup of this year. And we'll be talking about working with schools on PSE projects. And I'll be hopefully talking about some working with coordinated school health and some wellness coalitions. So we'll be working on getting some good speakers for that as well. As always, these sessions are recorded and you can find them on our FCS classroom under PSE nutrition supports, and they're usually made available about a week after. They're available at least a week after we've completed this session. So today we have some really great speakers. We have one less speaker than we usually do. So I'm hoping that'll give us some time for questions and potentially some discussion. So I'll be briefly talking about how we can all work together to leverage resources. And then we'll hear from Dr. Jennifer Ward, and she's going to be talking about some grants, different types of grants and some basics around grants. And then Heather's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the things she's learned being involved in getting some funding from Benton County. Finally, Chantal is going to speak from our evaluation team about some evaluation efforts surrounding this topic. So, TenSep and agents and PAs and extension can all really work together to leverage some funds for PSE projects. One role that we can really play is supporting grant applications as a community partner. So I'll give a couple examples of this. So Whole Kids is a grant application that I have talked with several people about. And that application actually needs to go through a school or be led by a school administration. But they do need a community partner involved. And Extension is a great community partner for that because we can provide education surrounding healthy eating and nutrition. And so supporting grant applications as a community partner is a great way to be a resource and get involved in some funding projects. Another idea for this, an example of this would be Project Diabetes, which are community grants, PSE focus grants through the health department that also benefit from having education connected to their PSE initiatives. So not only are you able to provide resources there, but you also you become a partner with that funding source, and you can work together. You are also a resource in the grant writing process. You all work with limited resource audiences. You work with community sites that serve limited resource audiences. And so you are able to share your expertise on that population. Additionally, you can be working with UT faculty that are writing grants and vice versa. If you are working towards funding, you can reach out to UT faculty as well and talk to them about funding. You also have a lot of resources in your partners, and being in your counties, you all have a lot of connections. So one connection I really emphasize is working, if you don't already work with your Master Gardener program, or you don't know your Master Gardener program, reach out to them, because they are a great help in finding resources and funding garden projects. Obviously, that's garden project specific, but also working with your coalition and the partners in your coalition is a great opportunity to leverage funds and resources. I believe we talked a little bit about this at our last Monday meetup, kind of a coalition exercise where you could talk through your coalition members and list out all of the resources that each of the partners could potentially provide to a project, and just have a kind of an understanding of what resources people are able to offer. And again, communicating with faculty on ongoing projects, because faculty may have resources for you as well, and vice versa. I also wanted to mention the Emma Crooks grant that Extension offers. It's a very simple application. It's 2 pages, and it offers $1,000, and these can fund some PSE projects. So if you have a project in mind, think about this funding opportunity that's available to you through Extension. Finally, I wanted to mention again, one of our first Monday meetups, we had a healthy development coordinator come speak with us, and these are staff members at the Tennessee Department of Health that really help you seek out funding for projects. So working with them, and everyone has a healthy development coordinator in their area. We actually had Cameron from East Tennessee come speak to us, and they offer a lot of resources, not just through health department, but they're very knowledgeable about where to find funding and resources. So I would encourage you, if you have not already, to reach out to your healthy development coordinators, talk to them, and just get to know them and what they can offer for you. And we do have the link to that already on our PSE classroom, but I'll go ahead and when I post this link that as well. All right. And we'll have Dr. Jennifer Ward speak next.
All right, can you hear? I had to switch to my phone because my computer did the thing where it's loud and running. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, all right, good deal. So sorry, I'm on my phone and the computer, so I'm kind of looking at the slides on the computer. So I'm excited to talk to you today about leveraging funds, why we want to do that, and some background into my experience grant writing, really in the trenches. So I haven't studied grant writing, I have practiced it, and I've been doing it for over 10 years now, I guess. Let's go to the next slide. So I just want to establish my background a little bit so you know why I'm qualified to talk to you today, and you can frame anything I say with this in mind. So I was for 5 years executive director of Bridge Refugee Services, and Bridge Refugee Services does refugee resettlement with mostly federal funds. And so that was an application and a grant process a lot like SNAP-Ed, and with similar restrictions and federal guidelines and things like that. 10,000 Windows was a small nonprofit that I worked for, and did development and wrote foundation grants for them for about a year while I was in grad school. And then of course, now I am the program director for TNSEP and FNEP. And so through all of that experience, I have written for and managed more than $18 million worth of funds. And so today I'll be talking to you about that experience and what I've learned over time. Next slide, please. So there's several different types of funding. This isn't an exhaustive list, but this is where I have experience. So we have governmental grants, and they can be both federal and state grants. In refugee resettlement, there were federally funded grants that were then state pass-through. And TNSEP works kind of similarly because we work with DHS at the state level, and we are considered an implementing agency for SNAP-Ed. So those are usually generally really big grants that have very involved applications and that have to go through, a big system like the university. Then there's foundation grants, which are extremely variable. You have Robert Wood Johnson, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, really big foundations like that. And then you have small foundations, community level, church level grants that you can apply for and search for. There aren't governmental grants, have grants.gov. You can go search for grants funded that way, but foundation grants are a little bit harder to find. There's some paid subscriptions. I don't have a subscription right now to Foundation Finder, but when you search around and get to know people in your community, like Corey said, that's a good way to start and find some of those. Then there's private funding, of course, unrestricted donations. I worked a lot with that at Bridge and in the nonprofit world with 10,000 Windows. And then there's internal institutional awards, which is like the Emma Crooks grants. So all of these are require different things when you're looking at them, planning for them, and writing them. Go to the next slide. So we want to leverage funds because diverse funding sources allow us to do more things with our programming. So if you've worked with SnapEd, you know there's a lot of things that we can't buy. We can't buy aprons, we can't buy furniture, and we can't buy food to distribute. So when you find other sources of funding, you can supplement your program. And I know one of the Monday meetups was about the garden in Gibson County, and that's exactly what they did, not necessarily through grants, but through community funding and cash and in-kind donations. So there's several different ways you can diversify your funding sources. And I'm saying all this with the caveat that we're in a university system, all of us. And so we have to work through the university system and the protocol. And so anything that you do or might go for or look at needs to go through your county director and the region and all those things. So writing funding proposals I have here is the biggest one. Managing the funding that you have at the county. And so, you know, your fee for service and things like that, and then be a line item in other people's budgets. And you can do that. You know, when I was at Bridge, we would talk to governments like local city and county governments, to different faith communities and work to become part of their regular budget through networking and things like that. That isn't necessarily something that you might do as an agent, but it's something to keep in mind for certain projects or as you're working with coalitions. They might have budgets that you can be included in. But what I'll be talking mostly about today is writing funding proposals. The next slide, please. So there's a few questions to think about before you start writing a grant. So you've really got to think about what goal you're trying to accomplish, what kind of program you're trying to fund. Is it existing? Is it new? What are you actually trying to do? What type of funding do you already have? And then what type of funding is going to be helpful? So, and then also, what do you have the capacity to write for or manage? Those federal or state governmental grants are extremely intensive, time consuming. I spent the last 2 weeks writing the 10-step grant and couldn't do much else. So, you know, those are things to consider. And then who are your partners in this? Are there already funds available that you don't need, you know, you might not need to write for? What is the need that you're trying to fill and fund? Next slide. And then I want to speak a little bit about the difference. So once you've considered those questions and you've decided that you want to go for a certain grant, there's a different style or an approach depending on what type that you're going for. So the 10-step or SNAP-Ed grant, refugee resettlement grants, bigger, like the farmer stress grant, those things, you would look on grants.gov and look for an RFP. Now, the 10-step grant and the refugee resettlement grant were allocated and appropriated. They weren't competitive grants and aren't right now. And so we pretty much know they're going to ask us to propose for them, and we just have to do a decent job. And that is different than the competitive grants like farmer stress, which are, on different, that are funded through different appropriations and for a shorter amount of time. You have to plan in advance for some of these bigger governmental ones. They have short announcement times to a deadline. And this is really where, if you found one of these, you would want to talk to talk to the faculty in the department and start planning. And so what a lot of people will do will look at the funding cycles for grants and start planning 1 to 2 years in advance. And then when the announcement comes out and there's 2 months to write it, you've actually already got most of what you need ready to go. They're generally pretty long. The SNAP-Ed grant, I think, is about 300 pages. And when you're writing these, you're really speaking to the head. And this is in contrast to foundation grants where you're more speaking to the heart. And this is my experience. So the governmental grants are usually have a very strict template. You're talking a lot about, we have a huge section for the needs assessment. It's very data heavy. You're citing all the evidence, using logic models, timelines, all those things. And you're just proving that you can do what you say you're going to do. Foundation grants are a little bit different. They're great. They're a little bit, I don't want to say easier to get because it depends on what you're going for, but it's a little bit less time intensive. So you can look for opportunities with foundations to submit, and I have a typo in there, to submit a letter of interest or letter of inquiry, depending on what they call it. And generally that's about a 1 to 2 page letter saying you saw that they have a funding opportunity, you have this idea, you have some proof and some credibility in that letter that you can do it and that you have a plan. These are normally accepted on a rolling basis. Of course, that varies from foundation to foundation. They're shorter. And the writing style on these is really speaking more to heart. So when I was working for 10,000 Windows as a development coordinator, I was writing foundation grants for mostly faith-based organizations in San Francisco to fund programs in the Philippines. It was really far apart and it was really far away from me in Knoxville, and it was all remote work. Go figure. But those were very different applications than the ones that I write for SNAP-Ed or that I used to write for refugee resettlement. We used biblical language because that was what the foundation wanted to hear, and talked about the meaning behind the program. We would also use evidence that the program worked. Of course, you can't leave those things out, but it was definitely a different writing style. So you have to think about that. You don't have to be afraid to speak personally in grant writing. And I think that's a really good thing to remember. If you will go to the next slide. So there's some really important rules for grant writing. You have to read the call for proposal, foundation, government, any kind of proposal multiple times. Make sure you follow every direction. If you've read it 3 times, you probably need to read it 3 more. There's usually a lot of things to include, a lot of attachments, a lot of requirements. Make sure you follow all directions. Those attachments are important. So for SNAP-Ed, we have to attach university FNA letters, our policy for indirect costs. We attach the audience and curricula list, and a few other things. But now I can't remember. I just submitted it last week. And then letters of support. So when it's a new grant or a new program and you have community partners involved, letters of support show that you have a multi-sector engagement and they're more likely to be funded. Proofread several times, get people to help you proofread. Little mistakes in grants aren't passed over, I've noticed, very easily. So it's really important to be precise. And then late submissions are often not accepted. Of course, that's when it's not on a rolling basis. But with the foundation grant process, like I told you, for many of them, they accept them on a rolling basis. If you are accepted to write a longer proposal after you write your letter of inquiry or interest, then you'll generally have a deadline, and lateness does not often get funded. Okay, you'll go to the next slide. I wanted to go through the main skeleton of a grant and a successful grant. So first you'll have your rationale. In TENSEP, that's where we have our needs assessment and all the evidence backing up that our programming works and has been effective. And we're also citing evidence based on research or based on practice. We're really, really specific about what our programs do and the need that it addresses. And we use literature to do that. So we're using peer-reviewed, published research. Then we include the project plan and timeline. So we're really specific about everything we do. And that's why TENSEP is so long to write, because we're including every piece of curricula, every PSC or social marketing strategy. And we have at the beginning a logic model. So and this is also evidence-based. So we're putting in our inputs and saying what we will accomplish based on what our activities are. We describe key players. So I don't do this as much. I do have a staffing plan in the SNAP Ed budget, but in refugee resettlement, if I included anyone that was outside of our organization, I would have to describe who they were. So if you're working with another food pantry, you might name the director or the main point of contact for them and what they do in the community and what specifically they're going to do on the project that you're proposing. And then the budget, and I'm going to go into the budget on the next slide a little bit more, but you have to pay attention to allowable costs. There's a lot, especially foundation community grants, that they say they will not fund something specific. Generally, it's capacity building. So there's certain capacity building grants, and that means, research or space, things like that. A lot of foundations don't want to fund that. So they'll fund a program, people, supplies, but they're not going to fund an asset, the purchase of a building, things like that. So pay attention to allowable costs and don't include anything not allowable in your budget, in your proposed budget. That's a really quick way to take it off the pile. And then categorize and itemize expected expenses. And there's going to be something that you forget, like stamps or something like that. That's been my experience. And so we're categorizing them in the budget. Normally there's a template. If there's not a template, there's some pretty easy ways to make budgets or talk to an accounting specialist to help you. And then, so have them under federally recognized line item categories, and then itemize those expenses. So I write how many Post-its we're going to buy in SNAP Ed. That's a lot, actually, of Post-its and pens and things like that. So they know I expect to buy 50 packs of this blue ink pen. Now, because it's an allowable cost, we can go a little bit above or below, but we write what we expect to buy and the price per item. And of course, if you've done any SNAP Ed program, you know that our incentives have to be under $5. And so I have to write out each of those and the expected quantity that we'll buy and the item per unit or the price per unit. And then, of course, in the end, you'll talk about the outcomes you expect from your program and then also your evaluation plan. Be clear about what your program or proposal will deliver as written. And so if you do get approved and you do get funding, but they offer you a little bit less, you have room to negotiate and say, well, then I'm only going to reach 25 people instead of 50 or something like that. Next slide. So budgets can be a little daunting, I think, at times. I actually taught a class at UT, and one of the assignments I had them write a grant, and everyone kind of worried, all my students worried about it, but you don't have to be writing a $6 million grant. You can write $500 grants for books for a classroom, things like that, but they're all going to require some type of budget. This is the main budget template or the budget summary for SNAP Ed, and I've taken out all the numbers because it's not final, and so I didn't want to put anything out there that wasn't truth yet. But generally, you'll have direct costs and indirect costs. Your direct costs are essentially what you're going to be spending on. So remember what it might cost to hire people, if you're going to be hiring people or paying a volunteer, or maybe an interpreter under a contract if you're not hiring new people. And if you are paying a salary, don't forget benefits. Supplies is usually the biggest part of grants that you might do at the county level. Printing and shipping, travel, so including mileage, things like that. And looking up the federal rates for those things. So in travel, you're going to be looking up the current rate instead of just us, providing estimates. Any subcontracts you might do, storage space, things like that. So it's really easy to just think, I'm doing, books for a classroom, but maybe you're going to want to print out a flyer also to advertise these new books in your classroom. And so, think about all those little things that might also be included or necessary. And then indirect costs are generally, like, we don't have indirect costs actually on FNEP, but we have to include it on TNSEP. And so those big governmental grants will have UT has a 14% or 14.5% indirect cost rate. And that basically funds the department, keeping the lights on, things like that. And so indirect costs come into play in some of the bigger grants. The next slide, please. And when it comes to foundation or private funds, when you're searching for those, make sure your project matches their current mission or funding priorities. You might know generally what they do, but foundations frequently revise what their focus is on. It's good practice to go back and look at what they've funded in the past few years and what applications were successful. So you can get a good idea of the style that they like, what kind of speaks to them, the amount of detail provided in the funded proposals, and check and make sure that what they're currently funding is what you want to do. That letter of interest is really important. So it's not a short, quick email. It is involved and it should be compelling and is typically what I call dense writing. So you're writing it's not a lot of space, but you're putting a lot of information into a little bit of lines. And then if that is successful, there's generally an invitation to make a full proposal, and that sometimes comes with a presentation. I've done a lot of presentations to try to get money, and those are fun. And by fun, I mean pretty nerve-wracking, but I think it's a really good learning process, and it's really exciting when it gets funded. And then of course, guidelines vary. So one foundation to the next is not going to, predict what you do. Next slide. And so generally in any of these, the post-award, you'll negotiate the budget and your deliverables. So if you aren't getting fully funded, you'll negotiate what you're able to do with it, and just make sure it's clear what you're promising. You'll go through an implementation time, of course, hiring or purchasing, and then evaluating what you did and then reporting on it. That's another part that varies. So your reporting requirements are specific to the funding institution. So make sure you pay attention if you have quarterly reports, annual reports, things like that. SNAP-Ed has both quarterly and annual reports. And so we have to stay on top of those. And I know you hear from Dr. Frank asking for your numbers for those. So thank you, by the way, for sending those in. That helps us to keep getting funded. And then the next slide. And just quickly with leveraging other funds, I talked a little bit before about being a line item. So you have partnerships and relationships in the community, get to know the other people doing work similar or complementary to what you're doing, and see if they have funding for something that might bolster one of our programs. So with TNSEP, we can't do food distribution. That's a really big thing. And so when if someone can, donate items to distribute or fund items to distribute, that's a really great way to make sure the people that we're telling to eat more produce actually have access to that produce. You can write letters of support for people writing other grants, and that's a good way to be involved in that and be included as a partner that might benefit from the funding. And then searching for those internal institutional awards. There's a lot more than we realize. I'm not as familiar. Of course, I'm 2 years in, probably in 2 days to this job, but Extension has a lot of awards and things like that. But I know UTK, the main campus, and when I was in grad school, had a lot of internal funding too. And then always follow institutional protocol. This is not where I'm an expert, but for TENSUP, we have to go through the Office of Sponsored Programs and go through the main system. So that makes sure that they can record and track and make sure that everything is in compliance, because compliance is a really big deal with grants. And also, when you're thinking about writing a grant, it's a really good idea to contact them and make sure no one else is trying to apply for the same thing from the same institution. They really like to make sure that we're working together on those things. And if someone is applying for the same foundation grant or something, you can join efforts and make a stronger application generally. So it's a good idea to contact OSP or Office of Research and Engagement to make sure you have the best chance and the strongest application possible. Next slide. And the best proposals, as kind of a conclusion, fill a demonstrated need. So you're gonna have to prove that there's a need to do what you want to do, and that you can't really do it without them. It's really important to, if you're writing a foundation letter, we need you because of this, and we can't do it otherwise. The best proposals are clear and free of errors. So proofreading is really important. Making sure your numbers match up is really important. They comply with the request for proposals and the guidelines. So if a request for proposals asks for a 30-page document and you send 31 pages, it is very likely you're off the pile right away. It's very similar to job applications, where if you forget, to include that cover letter, you're out of the pile before they even read it. The best ones are multi-sector and collaborative in nature, so have community partners. They're well designed and accomplishable, that you're not proposing pie in the sky type of stuff, that you can do it and you can demonstrate that. And then match the mission of the funding institution, so it's something that they do. And then next slide. In conclusion, there's a lot to learn about this. If you Google how to write a grant, like a million things pop up. There's a lot of textbooks and books about this. A really great place to start is our Office of Sponsored Projects. And that's the website for UT, and then researching online, tips, opportunities, templates. There's a lot of things like that. If you're looking at something in your county that complements the TENSUP or SNAP-Ed programming, we'd love to know about it. I'd love to know about it. I'm happy to proofread anytime. Let us know what you're looking at, and we can help make a strong proposal. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. All right, so now we will hear from Heather Smith. Heather, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that you can share your slides. So Heather has a lot of experience working and helping direct some funding in her county. And let me just change the permissions there. So Heather, are you able to share your screen? Hi, Heather.
I think I am. I'm going to get going here. Let's see. Is it working?
It is. We can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. I was shocked when I was asked to present. Can you hear me good?
Yeah, we can hear you. Heather, you're in presenter mode.
Oh, sorry. Let me change that. Let me try it again. How about now?
Perfect.
Okay. When Corey reached out and asked if I'd be willing to present, I thought, okay, I don't know anything about PSE, but if you're an extension agent and a family consumer science agent, you've done PSE a long time. It's just not what you think as policy, system, and environment, maybe. And maybe from my presentation today, you can see where maybe you've already done PSE work, or where you can fit some PSE work into something that you have for the future. So with that being said, I'm mid-career for all our newbies out there, and I want to preface this by saying it doesn't happen overnight. You just don't show up at a meeting and a grant falls into your lap, or an opportunity for you to leverage resources and funding for you to be able to do a big project, unless you're just golden, and we've had some agents fall into that category too. So don't get discouraged and just keep trying. So with that being said, see what's going to go. There we go. Purpose is the reason for your journey, and passion is the fire that lights your way. And oftentimes in extension work, it's your passion that people see in your community. And when you're leveraging resources and funding, if you're passionate about something, a lot of times it will spark an idea. And all my programs that I've leveraged resources and funding for have come from a small, tiny idea. And with that idea, these two projects that I featured here, the Community Cares event, and I'm not in this picture because I'm really not a grant writer for this program, but this is the Tennessee River Line project. And because of a small idea that came out of our health council, our park has now, our state park has now become, we were a Tennessee River Line community, and now we're a Tennessee River Line county, and they got free kayaks at the beginning of the summer to loan out at our park for visitors and people in our community to use to get more exercise. So how does that start? They started very small. They started at a meeting. They started at a table. They started at a conversation before the meeting or after the meeting. People shared what they wanted or what they need or what they thought would make our community a better place. The Benton County Health Expo was where the Community Cares event started. Actually, it started as a business expo through the chamber. They couldn't get anybody to come to the business expo, so they partnered with our health council to provide health, wellness, and cooking demonstrations to our community, and more people came. And from that, it grew into a Community Cares event for the last 3 years, where we have leveraged funds to advertise and marketing and providing food demos and live demonstrations to our community. And our United Way has joined forces, as our school has, to provide materials for our kids throughout the school year and food as well. And so it has been a huge event that started from a small idea that came from a business expo to now a Community Cares event where children can receive all kinds of information, health, wellness, business information, where to get a job for their families, food, and then supplies for the school year. So it's been a great success for us, but it started with a small idea. The Tennessee River Line is just one component of our free activities for our community. We started with, how could we make our county more healthy? We were the 95 and the healthiest county in the community, in the state. And so a team of us started thinking about, how can we get people in our community to be more health conscious and health aware? Well, I taught more classes. The school allowed me to come in. We were able to teach 10-step programming. And then from that, we also were able to leverage diabetes grant through the schools and through the county to put in health equipment into our gyms, into some public areas for people to get more exercise. Then we were able to leverage funding to get walking trails into our community where people could actually walk in the rural areas of our county at the schools. And then we branched out. Now we have healthy parks, healthy persons, that healthy people, healthy communities that we partner with the state park, as you can see JC in the picture. But from that, then we applied for the Tennessee River Lines program, where we could make our county a whole location to provide outdoor activities for free for our community and other people. So these turned into big projects, and it all started with a small idea. Success in finding funding. Funding can be hard to find to fit your project. Sometimes you have to go out and just ask. Sometimes you have to see what your community has to offer, such as your local businesses. Sometimes for me, I leverage funding and my resources. If I'm going to do this program, then if you'll give me a giveaway or a prize, then I'll market your business. And a lot of times I target businesses that are tied to health and wellness in our community. or they have a passion for health and wellness themselves. I provide marketing. Sometimes they market for me, funding for projects that fit their mission. And oftentimes that's a hard piece to think about, but local gyms have given me money because they want people to use their facilities. And so that's extra marketing for them. If they win a free week at the gym, it doesn't cost them as much. And then that person comes and joins their gym, and then they get their family to join their gym. And then the whole thing is that whole family is getting healthy and eating better. Excuse me. I apologize. Local nonprofits for marketing. I use them oftentimes for a lot of marketing. They have a client base that maybe I don't touch. An audience oftentimes is where, my nonprofits, they need to get out their message. And so they may have an audience, or I have an audience that they need to get their message out to. Funds for projects that fit their mission. Again, local nonprofits like to get their word out about what they're trying to do. And so if it fits their mission, a lot of times they will give you money. My local clothes closet at the First United Methodist, they provide me space and money for projects to provide cooking classes in their church, and some other things that I've done with youth over the years to teach kids how to cook, because they feel like that getting kids to the table is important for that mission. Getting that, I'm sorry, I'm a little getting people to the table is very important to them. And so having a family unit, and that expresses that, teaching kids to cook and then going home to cook with their families is a mission that they like to see happen in their communities and in their churches. Other grants are always available. We see those all the time. They come over the thing, but local businesses like corporations have grants, like Waste Management, Walmart, Kubota, we've seen here recently. There's other grants out there with big corporations that sometimes we forget. Lowe's has a big grant that they offer. Program partners with money, and that's where that letter of support comes in. Sometimes I just write a letter of support for them to apply for some money, and then it trickles down to me and some of my programming because I've provided support for them. Then they're going to turn around and provide support for me. And sometimes that means money, or sometimes that means just showing up to my programs or marketing my programs. And then later down in a couple of years, they may provide some money for something. Volunteer donations. I have a lot of this in my community. Passion for projects is what I call it. They like to fund what they love. Where do people spend their time and their money in your community? And where do they donate that? And see if those are people that can fit into your mission, especially in TNSAP or your other program areas that maybe they can help you. So it's a big web of network, but these are some of my funding sources that I've partnered with. I get a lot of money from co-op. I know that people think, well, that's agriculture, but agriculture is about family, friends, and they love to support families as well. And so Second Harvest Food Bank is something, they don't give me funds, but they market for me. Of course, our school system, our county government, the River Line, and then United Way is a big program sponsor for me. I've worked with two friends at the same agencies for 19 years as another big bonus for me. They have not changed. Their faces have not changed. We now look for opportunities that we help each other and their agencies and our community partners. I had the opportunity this year. An outside program partner came to me and said they had $20,000 to spend in my community. Could I use it for my programming efforts? Well, we talked and sent some emails. She sent me the paperwork, and it would not work for what I was doing at the time. So I reached out to the local school system. I set up the meeting for her, and our local school system got $20,000 because of a relationship that I had with a county program partner outside of the community that wanted to get her foot in the door. So did I lose $20,000? Not really, because the school system will scratch my back later on down the road. And I didn't lose because my community gained $20,000 that they would not necessarily have the opportunity to get because of the relationship that I had with this program partner. So barriers, we all have barriers. And when you're in the beginning, there's always a barrier of any project, but finding funding can be so hard. And I understand that, to fit your project. It might fit one part, but not the whole grand scheme of things. And sometimes you have to go out and see what your community has to offer. Okay. And so sometimes that is a trouble. But when you come to the barriers, they come in all shapes and sizes. Many cannot be overcome in a short period of time, where others are just a phone call away to a friend in your community. And that's happened to me. And in my group that we work together to look for grants in our community, we've had that happen where we've looked and looked and looked for years and couldn't find anything. And then all of a sudden, something comes up and we make a phone call and then we get this grant or funding for a project. Partners may not want to work with you, or may not like what you have to offer, or they're not fit into their mission. Our community may not need what you have to offer. And a lot of times our big ideas are really scary to people. Change is scary, right? Starting something new is scary. So they might not know that they need something. Volunteers, it's not the right people at the table a lot of times. I like to call them negative Nancy's. And sometimes those people can really cause a lot of problems for and a barrier to grant writing or leveraging fundings and resources. Excuse me, I've got a head cold. Agencies, sometimes people do not live in your community and are not interested or invested in what you have to say. And I know in our rural communities, it's different people coming in, and a lot of times they're just a warm body in a chair. And they're doing their job, but they're not going to go above and beyond to, make your community a better place sometimes, like going the extra mile we've seen. So know that. Of course, time and PSE takes time. It takes lots of time. It takes years in some cases, but with a vision, things do happen. Excuse me. Excuse me. Funds. Let me get a drink. Hold on just a second. Excuse me. I hit the button before I meant to. All right, seat at the table. A seat at the table is sometimes all you need to make a huge impact with minimal efforts in your community. I've been at my table for 19 years. Some people have been right beside me along the way, and others have come and gone over those years. Some come back and others we never see again. But what I've learned is this: if you have enough passion, things will change. Excuse me. People change. Literally, people have changed at my table. Their minds have changed and their priorities have changed. The change brings funds. They allow you to overcome barriers, and long-term projects can become completed. Excuse me. These allow for lasting changes in your community. I've seen a lot of change in my community that I may have not only made an introduction or a phone call that have made a huge impact in the long run in my community. Excuse me. It is still a PSE that I was involved with because I made a call. It might not have happened if I had not been at the table. And I apologize for this, but if you have any questions, I'm right here. I'm going to mute myself and unshare my screen.
Thank you, Heather. That was really great information. Appreciate you taking the time to do that. All right. And I'm going to keep going. Next, we're going to hear from evaluation to hear some tips about evaluation on this topic. And we have Chantal with us. Chantal is with our 10-step SNAP-Ed evaluation team.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm excited to be here with you guys. Today, I apologize, the lighting's a little bit dark in my office, so hopefully you can hear my audio just fine. So from the evaluation team, we do data here, and we do both quantitative and qualitative data in our evaluation office. And so how that relates to grants is really, the strategic use of data, both quantitative and qualitative, is an opportunity to strengthen your grant writing. And in many ways, grants are opportunities for you to tell your story in a convincing way. To echo what, Corey, Jennifer, and Heather have said, it truly is important to really provide context and the right information at the right time to the right audience. Here in evaluation, that's what we strive to assist you with. Next slide, please. So some of this may be a repeat from some of the previous speakers, but hopefully this will just reiterate the importance of each of these topics. So, as I said, quantitative and qualitative data are really important, and there's typically 3 common areas in grant applications that require data, and those are need statements, goals and objectives, and evaluation. And those, depending on which grant it is, those titles may differ, but typically those are common areas. As the other speakers have also mentioned, if you want to click next, Corey. It's really important to remember that different grants have different requirements for evaluation and reporting. And so it's really critical that you make an effort to reflect that information in your application, and then in ongoing evaluation and reporting functions as well. Just like TNCEP and FNEP, our funders require Dr. Frank to then explain to you guys, okay, we need to have X, Y, and Z delivered and reported on, and this is the frequency of which we want it reported. And so a lot of our job in evaluation is dictated by our funders. So it's really important to know your audience and who you're applying to. Next slide, please. Going into these 3 common areas, more specifically, there's the need statement. So this section typically will ask you to make, the case for funding. So it's a great place to really get into the data, whether you did a custom needs assessment or using one that's previously been conducted, pulling from existing organizational data or other data from external sources. This is typically a great place to do that. One thing that the evaluation team does annually, myself and Ruth, we compile county health data indicators and other demographic information for each of the counties. And there's an image of last year's infographic or snapshot from last year on the right hand side here, but it's critical to really define who your audience is, and we want our funders to know exactly who our targets are. And here in evaluation we collect a lot of information, and we'd love to be able to return that to you in ways that can be compelling for your grants and funders that you're looking to convince to give you money. So suggestions here are, evidence of the need for money or partnership really is best presented clearly and documented with evidence. And so, basic demographics include age ranges, sex, race, ethnicity, economic levels, zip codes, addresses. Like I said, and that's important for us since we are typically trying to serve a specific demographic. It's important to match our program usage with census demographics as well, just to be consistent in how we're talking about it and how other organizations, whether it's federal or nonprofit, are utilizing these. And the second bullet here says include quantitative and qualitative data when possible. Stories are the way that humans are typically hardwired to communicate. And as Jennifer had mentioned, there's the ability to appeal to the head through logic and data, and then there's the ability to appeal to emotions and priorities of the heart, or things that are meaningful to us. And so to be able to have those both together, have both the head and the heart, being able to tell that story in a convincing manner is really powerful. So that's the mixed methods, essentially those 2 types of data can really set the context for the needs of your community and make the data more compelling. You know, so looking at the percent of individuals who struggle with food access can be supported with testimonials or quotes or stories from individuals within your community, and that can make a really big impact. And yeah, and that relates to that last bullet point as well, and using data to describe how the problem or goal most affects your target audience. Next slide, please. The third section is goals and objectives. An essential part of grant writing and evaluation really is clearly stating what you expect to accomplish with the grant. So those goal statements are the opportunity for you to lay out expected outcomes because of your efforts. And I say this over and over again, but evaluation isn't something that comes at the very end to wrap up things into a bow. That, you know, evaluation is best started in the beginning. So if you can plan your evaluation in the beginning with your goals and objectives, it really makes evaluating your program more effective and much easier as you go through your implementation process. So clearly state what you expect to accomplish with your grant. Again, utilizing data. Make your goals SMART. We hear that a lot, but make it specific and measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound, and assign numeric values where possible. If you want to click next, Corey, a quick example of this is, let's see, yeah, perfect. So there's a first statement that says we plan to reach low-income families through outreach efforts, and that's pretty vague. We don't know exactly what's going to be happening there. But again, if you can make something SMART with numbers and specifics, it makes it much easier. So we plan to reach, you know, this many low-income families. It's time bound and specific as to what you're actually going to be doing. All of this, making sure that it's informed and based in the data that you presented in the needs section. Next slide, please. And lastly, the third section or component of grants tends to be evaluation, where it is the section that really outlines the way that you'll evaluate the work that you're proposing to accomplish with the requested funding. So again, you know, our suggestions from evaluation are do draw on the data sources that you already have, and us here at the evaluation team, we have the data. We've got all the data, so much data. And so we want you to ask us for it. We want to be able to assist you in arranging and displaying and presenting that information in a compelling way. And if you're having difficulty determining an evaluation process or strategy, reach out to us. I have an example. Corey, if you want to click next. So just in as example for TNCEP and FNEP, those pre and post tests help us evaluate the effectiveness of our nutrition education classes by providing information on individual and group knowledge gain. So, you know, depending on what your project is, we'd love to be able to work out with you strategies to help evaluate the effectiveness of your program as well, not just with implementation measures, but also with outcome measures that really can demonstrate the impact of what you've been able to do with the funding that was given to you. Next slide, please. So in summary, using data and stories to accurately support a well-documented needs statement, objectives, and evaluation methods can really motivate funders to help, whether it's, you know, funding you with money or even just partnering, you know, changing opinions, changing ideas. All data and stories really are a core or key component in doing those things. So being able to clearly and concisely describe your impact on the community is often the difference between receiving a grant or not. And we want to let you know that your evaluation team is here to support you through all of that. Next slide, please. And then finally, you know, we've mentioned this before, I think on some of the Monday meetups, but if you need a specialized needs assessment, or if you need help compiling relevant county or program data, or help documenting a success story visually, in writing, or orally, we want to let you know that we're here to support you and hope that you'll reach out to us. That's it, thanks.
Excellent. I want to give a special thanks to all of our speakers today. we are at our mark, but I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions just in case anyone has any questions for our speakers. But if you need to check out,